Hello, hello. What is going on, everyone? Once again, my name is Wale Ade, and I am a pastor here in the great state of Maryland. And thank you for joining us tonight. Just want to let you know we do these lives every 6 p.m. But tonight is a special night because I want to share one of the reasons why this topic of church hurt is so near and dear to me. One of the reasons beyond what I'm going to share tonight is the fact that as a pastor, as I talk to a lot of people, as I interact with people both in the church and out of the church, there is one common thing that I continue to hear, and that's how people have in some form or fashion been hurt by the church or know somebody that's been hurt by the church. And when I kept hearing these different stories over and over and over and over again, I realized that we have a serious problem in our churches that we need to fix. And so it has been my mission to just help not only those who are hurting, because we want to give support to those who look for a relationship with God, but instead received pain and hurt in the process, but also to teach churches and church institutions on how they can reduce the harm and actually try to make it right. And so, this is near and dear to my heart, not only because of the other stories that I've heard, but it's also near and dear to my heart because of my story. And before I get into my story, just let me know where you're watching from. Go ahead and put that in the comments. We thank you for joining. I just like to know where my viewers are situated right now. So go ahead and put that in the comments as we get started tonight. And so, basically, I have been hurt by the church multiple times, right? So it up to the point where I left twice, but to tell you that I'm still not at the point where sometimes the church hurts, that would just be a lie, because it seems like we have something in our DNA, some sort of way that we interact with people that we don't realize is actually more hurtful and more harmful than it is helpful. And so there are ways that we can make adjustments, but I think it's really important for churches and church culture to try as much as possible to make it right and to make amends with those that they've hurt. So my story starts when I was young, right? So as I was growing up in the church, one of the things that I love about a lot of churches is that they have excellent children's programs. And so, I went in through the children's program, and usually the children's programs, especially when you go to a nice church that's more developed, they're great programs. They get the kids excited. You sing songs, you learn stories. So many great things happen. And so I was hooked onto, the Bible and my Christian culture at an early age. But one of the things that sometimes happens is that as you matriculate, right, as you grow older, sometimes there's so much emphasis put on the young people, but then at the teens and those going into colleges, sometimes those programs aren't as strong as the children's programs. And so I remember I was already at the point, honestly, in my own situation, where I actually believed that, the church was fake, if I'm just going to be honest. I came in and I saw a lot of people that kind of had the fake smiles. They'd be like, hey, how you doing? But it didn't feel genuine, right? I didn't grow up in church schools like a lot of my peers when I went to church school starting in my 11th grade year. But so I was around public school. And one thing I appreciate about the people in public school that I was around was a lot of times I felt that there was authenticity, right? They didn't try to be something that they weren't. They didn't try to act like that they were at a certain level. They just kind of were comfortable in their own skin. And so growing up around that environment, that's actually what I expected and more when I started encountering the church. But to my dismay, a lot of times people in the church just put on smiles. They just, talk to you as if they're really interested in your well wishes or in your well-doing. But sometimes it's just a form of being cordial. Sometimes it's just a way to be pleasant, but not really something that comes from a heartfelt place. So I was already kind of a little turned off to church and church things and church people. So I kind of, was distancing myself, kind of almost out, but kind of still in. So I remember one time I was invited to this program at a church here in Maryland, and I don't want to say the name, no, I don't want to throw any shade to any church, but the church was here in Maryland. And I remember I was invited, and I was excited to go, right? I actually was excited to go to church, right? I was excited to see friends. I was excited to have a good time. People from that church kept telling me how great, these programs were. And so I was just excited. So I decided to make that drive. And mind you, this church was about 40-ish minutes away from where I lived. And so I took that drive, excited, a young person, to come to I think it was like a youth program or something, and just excited to be there. And let me tell you, that is one of the worst experiences that I had ever had in my life. As a matter of fact, it was terrible because from the moment I walked in the door, I realized that my kind was not welcome there. Yeah. What happened was, back then, I'm dating myself now, but back then, baggy clothes were in, right? And so I used to wear everything baggy, my pants baggy, my shirts baggy, my hoodies baggy. And so I just wanted to come to church as is. Like I said, I was excited. It was a dress down thing. And so they told me to come. And so I came as I was, thinking, oh, this is going to be a great experience. But from the moment I walked through the door, the first thing that I noticed were dirty looks. And when I tell you dirty looks, I'm talking about dirty looks from the welcomers, the greeters at the door, right? So the first thing I see is somebody kind of looking at me on the way that I looked, the way that I appeared. And so, I felt a little uncomfortable, but of course, they did that fake, oh, hey, how you doing? Welcome. We're happy that you're here. But your eyes and your facial expressions kind of gave off the tone of what are you doing here, right? And so this is a church that's very close-knit, very family-oriented. And I want to make this clear. Sometimes I talk about race in church. This was a black church, okay? So this is not just, a church that had, a lot of white people in there. It was a black church, but it was an affluent black church, right? And so there was a certain type of standard that I felt that you needed to have to be accepted into that church. Most of the people there, they have high paying positions, high level of authority in their jobs. They're conference officials for the church. They have all wide variety of jobs. But, me, I didn't come from a family that is known in the church, right? I didn't have a lot of money. And so I felt that when I walked through the church that these things kind of worked against me. And so I remember going in, and so the first thing I got was the looks. And the looks were, terrible. But I was like, okay, I'm a little tough skinned, right? At least I thought as a kid. I was probably like 17 or 18. So I just kept walking. And so I found my friend, we're talking. And then I started to just get more and more looks, right? I actually saw people like, scrunching up their faces, just kind of like, why was I here? Like, I'm not the type of kid that they wanted their kids to be around. Right. And so little did they know that I was really kind of falling out of love with church. Little did they know that I was kind of falling out of the way of love with the way that church was doing things. Little did they know that I was actually excited to come to their church because of all the wonderful things the kids from their church told me about it. But when I came in, I just continued to receive these dirty looks. And so now, one thing I love about Christ, as I got to know him, because I realized that I did not really know Christ when I was going to church, right? It was actually when I had an encounter with him outside of church that I actually learned who he was. And one thing I learned about Christ is that he accepts everybody as is. And I want to make this clear because even though sometimes churches don't accept you as is, they didn't accept me as is, the Christ that we serve, the person that started the church, that honestly we have tainted, he accepts you just as you are. And the reason why is because God understands that you're not able to fix yourself, right? You're not able to do everything right. You don't have the power to make all these things change in your life. But God is the one, Christ is the one that can come into your heart and clean up those things in your character that are not like him. So he says, just come and allow me to do the work, and I'll do the work for you. But unfortunately, as churches, we want people to clean themselves up first before they walk into our doors, which is completely un-Christ-like. And so I walked through the church, and so it just became a bad experience as I kept seeing looks, as I kept seeing, the scrunched up faces, as I kept realizing that people did not want their children to associate with the likes of me. When I left the church, I came in for a blessing and I felt like I left cursed. And so after that, that was right before, my college years, I realized that I did not want anything to do with church or with church people, right? And so I kind of went off on a spiral. Everything just came crashing down. And I just want to give a warning to the churches and to those that are maybe a part of churches like this. One of the things that you don't understand is you don't understand how fragile these children are at those tender teenage years. Especially our black boys, right? I'm going to talk for all of our black kids, but especially our black boys, where all they look for a lot of times is acceptance. All they look for is a little bit of love. And I'm saying this from experience because I've worked in the juvenile detention center, I've worked in foster care facilities, and I can say that there's a lack of love for our young black boys. And when they come into your church, when they come into a place that's advertised to be a place of love, that's advertised to be a place where they can come and experience Christ, that's advertised to be a place where they can have a healthy community, and they receive these looks, they receive this treatment because they don't look like the way that you expect them to look, a lot of times you're causing a seismic hurt and damage that you don't know how many years it's going to take for them to recover. And so one of the things I just admonish us that are churchgoers, admonish us that are Christians, is that we really take the time to make sure we check our judgmental attitudes at the door, because you really don't know the weight or the burden of the people that are coming into your doors. And so we're going to go to some of the comments now, and I see that it says, Amen. Christ accepts everybody as they are. Hallelujah. God is not church people. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for adding that. And also, I see this as well. It says the world looks down on black youth. The church should do better. That's correct. And like I said, this church was not just any church. This church was actually a black church. So even sometimes our black churches look down on our black youth. And so we got to be careful with that, because I was in a fragile state. I know plenty of people are in a fragile state, especially at that age, very impressionable, looking for acceptance. And so we got to make sure that we have safe environments so that we keep our kids in the safety of a relationship with Christ. And so anyway, went off to college, did not want anything to do with church or church people. Barely went to church. I went from time to time, only because friends were going, but I lost my connection, didn't really have that mindset that I wanted to go to church. And the thing about it is I still believed in God. So let me make something clear. It's not that I left Christ. I just left the church because I didn't like what was going on in the church, and I didn't feel like I was being treated well. As a matter of fact, once again, affluent black church school. I remember there was a time when I was down there at Oakwood, because I went to Oakwood, and so there's this well-known church school that's affluent, where affluent blacks send their kids, and they were giving out lunches, right? And so I was a kid that, didn't have a lot of money, really wanted a lunch, and, I think I came to, it was college days, if anyone knows what that is in Oakwood. It's when the high school seniors come down to Oakwood to kind of see what it's like and kind of get a feel for the campus. And so I was a high school kid. My senior year, I think I went somewhere first. I was in Atlanta, so I had to come late, and I didn't get a bracelet for food, right? And so, but I wanted food because I was hungry, and I was a part of the campus. So I remember going up, and there was a lady from that school that was giving out lunches. And so I went up to her, and I was like, hey, you know, I am a high school student. May I have a lunch, please? I just didn't get a bracelet because I came in late. When I tell you she was rude and emphatically told me no, right? And just thinking about this, right? If a kid comes and says that they're hungry, right? And you are a representative of a church school, right? Would you not even just give them a bag lunch to see if they had something to eat? Like, she didn't know what my situation is, but by the way I looked, I'm pretty sure she thought that I was lying, right? And so she made a judgment, and I went away hungry. I had to go find some food somewhere else because, once again, you know, I believe that I was judged on the way that I appeared. And so, you know, I have to really, you know, sometimes I'm so hard on the churches that, you know, don't have a lot of black people in them, but I gotta be hard on us too, because oftentimes we can treat each other terribly as well. And so we gotta be careful that we don't do these things to the kids that don't come from our part of the neighborhood, that don't come from our neck of the woods, because they need this as well. They need acceptance, they need love, and most importantly, you don't know how impactful your negative actions can be. And when I tell you that was the icing on the cake, I kind of didn't want anything to do with the church. So that was around the age of 18. I can tell you, I didn't really have a real affiliation with the church till I was 23. Right, and by fluke. So that's the first time I kind of left the church, was when I had those terrible experiences, and I just realized that in my mind, the church people really didn't care about my story. They didn't care about my background. They didn't care about anything. They just judged me on the way that I looked, and that's all that mattered, right? And so I realized that's not the Christ I knew in the Bible, but hey, that's the church. So let me leave the church. Let me focus on my relationship with God, even though I wasn't really focusing on it. But I said, let me just do it on my own. So I left the church, didn't really go for about 4 or 5 years. And then I remember when I was 23, the only reason why I actually went back to church, and my mom didn't know this at the time, but I hadn't been going to church for a while, but she came down to go to one of my cousin's weddings. And so at my cousin's wedding, you know, she was there for the weekend, and so she wanted to go to church. So my mom is an avid church goer. Like, you cannot separate her from going to church. Actually, not going to church is a sin, right? And so, you know, she wasn't having it. Doesn't matter when she travels, how she travels, she's gonna find a church in that city to go to. And so she came down, and she wanted to go to church. So me being the kid, you know, I'm like, okay, well, I'll go to the church, you know, with you. I'll go see, you know, what's going on. I'll go, you know, just check it out. And so I remember that I went to the church. And so we went there. I had to get there early because my mom was always early to church, never late, right? And so we got there, we sat through, we did all of it. I think we did Sabbath school, we did everything. And then I remember, you know, getting to the sermon. And in the sermon, it was one of the elders that I'm really cool with now. He was preaching a sermon, and he was I think the youth leader at the time of the church. And so he's preaching a sermon. It just kind of hit my heart. Like, it just kind of hit me. And it hit me deep in my core. And so, you know, at the end of these sermons, a lot of times they do go out and they, you know, make appeals, right? An appeal is basically at the end of the sermon where they tell people, if you want to come to Christ, right? And so they allowed me to come to Christ. And so I remember going in the back, and what happened in the back is exactly the second reason why I left the church. But before I get into that, let me just see some of these comments. And so Nika N says, if people don't get love in the church, they'll get love somewhere else. And that's so true. In fact, a lot of times they'll get love in all of the wrong places, right? And so we got to make sure that we are showing the people love that go through our doors. Just want to say, if you are enjoying this stream, just go ahead and like, subscribe, share. This is on Facebook and YouTube right now. I encourage you all, please go to my YouTube page, you know, subscribe, like. There's more videos, more content. I want to talk about the stuff that matters to people who are seeking God. And so once again, this channel is for those who are disconnected. We're trying to connect the disconnected and redefine religion, because we believe, or I believe especially, that church has been not so faithful to the way that God has first wanted the church to be. And so we got to make some changes. And I think if we make these changes, people can actually come into our walls and have an authentic and life-changing experience with the God that we serve. And so let's see. So I see Dennis Deloche, man. That's my man from way, way back. How you doing, man? It's almost like we get saved and forget how we felt about church when we were unsaved. And that's so true. It's like we have amnesia. We forget that moment when we first had that interaction with Christ. We forget that time that we actually spent, with Christ, and how he changed us and how we were at low places. We completely forget, and we want people to come in where we have evolved to while in our relationship with Christ. So thank you for sharing that as well. And okay, black elitism is real. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we got to be careful, right? Because a lot of times people, especially of the black race, we see each other and we immediately think safety, right? So sometimes we even let our guards down. Like, we're in a situation or environment where people don't look like us. We have a guard up more times than 10 because we feel like it may not be safe, right? But amongst our people, a lot of us want to let our guard down, which makes the damage even harder because we don't have those walls. We don't have that warning sign in a lot of our minds because we think we're around our own people. And so somebody said, your skin folk ain't always your kinfolk. Unfortunately, that's true even in our churches. So back to the story. So I came, went to the back, after the appeal. Man, I was crying. I remember I was in tears. The sermon pierced my heart. And so they give out what they call like a connect card or something that you kind of write what you want or what you need from the church. And so I remember they had like a list of things to check off. I remember I was so moved emotionally that I checked off baptism. I checked off rebaptism. I checked off Bible studies. I checked off prayer. I think I checked everything off on that list, right? And so, I was really moved. My heart was turning inside, and I was like, man, I need to get back into church. I need to get back right with God. I need to do, these things. And so I was, really, really just yearning for that godly connection. And I want to pause here and say that, I don't know what happened because I know this church is a church that actually I came to love. Imagine that, right? The church that I'm about to tell you that hurt me is the same church that I came to love. I don't know what happened, but somehow, some way, I didn't receive a communication back from that church. And so for somebody who was already not feeling church, for somebody that was already, saying on the brink of, leaving church, for somebody that was already saying, enough is enough, I'm tired of church, to not get a call back in the most vulnerable state when you're really pouring out your heart saying, I need this, I need that, that was extremely damaging. And so I remember just saying, I'm never going back to church, right? In fact, to the point where I remember I was like, curse words like F church. If I'm just going to be honest, right? I didn't want anything to do with church or church people. I was done. It sent me down a spiral that was I was even more in a worse position than I was before. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because I just want to give an admonition to our churches. People are coming into your doors that are extremely vulnerable, right? And I know mistakes happen. I know life happens. Trust me, I'm a pastor now, so I know that things can happen and things can go wrong. But I just encourage churches that if you're going to do appeals, if you're going to, call people to come and give their life to Christ, that you have layers, right, of communication to make sure that that person is reached, right? So whether that's you have a paper layer of all the list of people that write, then you put that into an electronic system, and then you have like 3 people that are dedicated to call that person. Whatever it is, make sure that you have layers so that nobody slips through the cracks. As a matter of fact, I remember that when I eventually came back to the church, that I went back and I actually was starting to help. I used to go back with the people that came up with the appeals, especially the young black men, and I would pray and I would give them my contact and I'd make sure that I was connected to them because I knew how much that hurt me and how much it made me turn away from the church. And so, long story short, eventually I got back into the church, right? eventually I became a pastor, right? And so I did leave the church twice, but eventually I came back. And so I'll probably share that story on another stream, because I really want people to know that have experienced church hurt, that have experienced harm from church people, that, you know, what really I believe is that the devil uses these people to stop you from getting to what you actually need. Because when I tell you I went everywhere else, I tried everything else. Well, not everything, but I tried to see and find the thing that I was looking for in other places, and I could not find it. I realized that it actually was in church. I just had to get through all of the toxic church people, right? And so the devil would use people, you know, whether knowingly or unknowingly, to be a hindrance to you having an authentic connection with him. And so it is possible to be hurt by the church multiple times and still go back and find that safety that you need in Christ. And so I'll share that in another stream, but I just really want you all to know that church hurt is real, right? Church hurt has a lot of our young people and a lot of our grown people as well, just wanting nothing to do with the church and even falling out of relationship with Christ. And so I'm just admonishing us, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have a real, authentic relationship with Christ. Because if you don't have a real, authentic relationship with Christ, you won't be able to love people the way that they need to be loved. You won't be able to accept people as is. You won't be able to really disciple and nurture people, because you have not actually experienced Christ in your heart for yourself. And so I just pray for each and every one of you who have been hurt by the church, for each and every one of you that may have done the hurting, that God will open up your eyes, that God will give you exactly what you need, and that our churches will become a safe place for everybody to grow. So once again, my name is Wale Ade, and this is another edition of Religion and Politics, where we once again are trying to redefine religion and also connect the disconnected with Christ. This is a ministry that I'm really trying to use to help people, because there's plenty of people that have been harmed. And so I just ask that if you can support me in many different ways. So number one, it does take money, so if you would like, go ahead and bless the Cash App. You know, if that is something that you're able to do, if you like this ministry, I just ask that you do that and that you help us to grow this ministry so that we can help those people who have been hurt by the church. But also, money is not everything. Listen, I appreciate your prayers as well. So if there's anybody that, you know, just wants to throw prayers out for this ministry, that wants to help us in this ministry, I'm just asking that you please pray for us, and pray for those that we're trying to serve, which are those who have been hurt by the church and don't want anything to do with Christ, knowing that, you know, as we as believers, that Christ is really what can bring the healing that they need to their lives. And secondly, or thirdly, I should say, on Facebook, I appreciate it. Keep liking, sharing this video for anyone that may have experienced church hurt. We're trying to give tools and resources to help them to recover. But also, go ahead and like, love it, you know, comment. I wanted you to join the conversation. If you know anyone that's been hurt by the church, or if you've been hurt by the church, even DM me. Tell me your story. You know, we want to make sure we address all aspects of this thing we call church hurt and religious trauma. And if you're on YouTube, in fact, I invite all of my Facebook users to go to YouTube. Please go to YouTube and like, subscribe, share, comment there as well. That will greatly help this channel and help the ministry that we are trying to do here. So once again, my name is Pastor Wale Ade, and this is another edition of Religion and Politics. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. we're doing a live. Next week, we're going to talk about a special topic. I read a book. It's called The Immigration Gap. And so it's especially for all of those who are children of immigrants that have come into the church, have experienced some sort of church hurt through, you know, the teachings that may have happened in the churches overseas. I have a special guest. Her name is Mrs. Tanuke Fowle, and she'll be sharing some ways that we can reduce the hurt and the trauma that immigrant children have, and also some ways that we can continue to close that gap so that children can be once again reunited with their parents and be able to communicate in healthy levels and build strong and healthy family relationships. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you on the next video. God bless.